The desert does not lie. It shows you everything you need to know if you're willing to read it. The color of the sand an hour after sunrise. The way heat shimmer bends the horizon into something untrustworthy. The silence that falls before a wind picks up. That specific hollow, quiet, like the air is holding its breath, deciding whether to exhale or scream. Specialist Elena Hayes had been reading this desert for 6 months. She read it the way a surgeon reads a patient's face, not with urgency, not with emotion, but with the cold patience of someone who understood that what you missed could kill you. She sat behind the wheel of a 7-ton LMTV and watched the convoy assemble in the gray dust of FOB Harding's motor pool. 4 vehicles, 1 VIP transport in the middle. The usual configuration. She watched the men moving around her truck the way she watched everything, steadily, cataloging, storing. Staff Sergeant Dominic Ruiz walked past her door without looking at her. "Wheel girls early," he said to no one in particular. His tone was the kind of flat amusement people use when they're certain they're among friends. "Does she sleep in the cab?" Private First Class Owen Tabb laughed. He was 22, had been in country for 3 weeks, and had already learned to model himself on whoever seemed most confident. Elena said nothing. She adjusted her side mirror, checked the tire pressure gauge on the dash, marked the fuel level full, which meant someone had actually done their job last night. Small mercies. She entered the number in the small notebook she kept tucked above the sun visor, next to the worn photograph she had stopped looking at months ago but could not bring herself to remove. Hayes. Lieutenant Marcus Carter appeared at her window, clipboard in hand. He was 26, a West Point graduate who still used words like synergy in briefings and hadn't yet learned to stop, but he was meticulous, and she had noticed that about him early. "Sir. Route Alpha 7, same as last time. You've run it before?" "4 times, sir." He made a note. "Any issues with the vehicle?" "No, sir. She's good." He hesitated. It was a brief thing, half a second, the kind of pause a person makes when they're deciding whether to say something or leave it. "Captain Mercer wants wheels up in 20. I'll be ready." He walked away. She watched him go in the rearview mirror. She had requested a route change 3 days ago. She had submitted it through the proper channels, a written note through Sergeant Ruiz to Lieutenant Carter, outlining 2 specific observations. First, that Route Alpha 7 passed within 400 meters of a ridgeline that had gone conspicuously quiet over the past week. No civilian vehicles, no shepherd movement, no smoke from the usual cook fires near the village of Darrock. Second, that she had observed tire marks off the main road 2 convoys ago, marks that ran perpendicular to the route for roughly 60 meters before disappearing into scrub. The note had come back with a single annotation in red pen. "Not relevant. Maintain standard route, CPT Mercer." She had read that annotation 3 times, folded the note precisely in half, and put it in the notebook. She had not written another one. Ruiz had seen it happen. He had been in the motor pool when she handed him the original note, and he had been in the hallway outside Mercer's office when it came back. He had not said anything to her, but she had seen the particular quality of his silence, the silence of a man who understood something and had concluded there was nothing useful to do about it. She did not hold it against him. Ruiz had a family in Corpus Christi and 7 months left on his deployment and a career he had built carefully over 12 years. He picked his battles by necessity rather than preference. This was reasonable. She had made peace with it. What she had not made peace with was the system that made reasonable people choose their battles. But she had stopped fighting that particular war. The thing about being invisible is that you see everything. People behave differently when they believe no one is watching. They are more honest in their carelessness. They drop their guard in small ways that accumulate into a picture. Elena had been accumulating pictures for 6 months. And the picture she had assembled of Captain Delwyn Mercer was not flattering. He was a man who had been told he was exceptional so many times that he had stopped testing the hypothesis. He managed up with precision and managed down with contempt. He had the kind of confidence that mistakes itself for competence. He was the man who had dismissed her note. He would be riding in the second vehicle today. She did one final check of the mirrors left, right, center, and found them correctly positioned. She checked the radio frequency, confirmed it against the mission briefing sheet, entered it in her notebook. She checked the fuel level again, not because she didn't trust the first reading, but because she had learned that the discipline of redundant verification was the thing that saved you in the cases where the first reading was wrong. Garrett Oakes had told her that too. Trust your instruments and verify them anyway. The instrument is not the truth. The instrument is a report on the truth. Reports can lie. She had trusted Oakes completely. He was the finest teacher she had encountered, in the army or elsewhere, not because he possessed more technical knowledge than anyone else, though he did, but because he taught with the understanding that knowledge without judgment is a weapon with no safety. He had cared very much about the judgment. He had been retired for 4 years. She did not know where he lived now. She suspected he was somewhere rural, somewhere quiet, doing the kind of nothing that people who have done too much of something eventually need. She started the engine at T-18 minutes and listened to it settle. A slight rough patch in the idle, then it smoothed. She reached up and touched the edge of the photograph without looking at it. 20 minutes later, the convoy rolled out through the gate. Elena counted the rotation of her front left tire in her peripheral vision. an old habit. Her first instructor, a lean, weathered man named Garrett Oakes, who had smelled like diesel and black coffee, and who was the finest teacher she had ever had told her that counting revolutions was a form of meditation. "Your mind needs something small to do," he had said, "so the big part of you can stay open." She kept her eyes forward and stayed open. Route Alpha 7 ran southwest from FOB Harding through 15 kilometers of open desert before cutting north through a narrow passage between two ridgelines. The locals called the passage the Throat. American military planners had named it Waypoint Delta. The difference in names said something about perspective. 22 minutes into the drive, Elena felt the first wrongness. She did not hear it. She did not see it. It was a pressure change, something atmospheric, the kind of thing the body registers before the mind can articulate it. The road was empty. This road was never empty at this hour. There should have been the flatbed truck that always ran agricultural supplies from the western farms to Dirac. There should have been 3 or 4 motorcycles. The same faces she'd memorized over 6 months of runs. There should have been the smell of something: cook fires, animals, diesel, human settlement. There was nothing. The desert had gone quiet in the wrong way. She keyed her radio. "Convoy lead, this is Hayes. I'm seeing 0 civilian traffic. No movement on the ridgeline north of Waypoint Charlie." A brief silence. Then Sergeant Ruiz's voice, dry and automatic. "Copy that, Hayes. Continue route." She set her jaw. In the vehicle behind her, she heard faint laughter through the open frequency. Someone had left a mic keyed. She recognized Tab's voice, high and easy. "She does this every time, man, like she's got some kind of sixth sense." The frequency clicked off. She looked at her mirror. The ridgeline north of Waypoint Charlie sat in full morning sun. Clean rock, pale brown, undisturbed. Not a single shadow that moved. Not a glint, not a there. A glint. Gone in an instant, swallowed back into the rock like something had shifted and then corrected. 300 meters up the ridge, slightly northeast. Possible optics. Possible glass. She noted the position. Angle from her current position, roughly 40 degrees. Elevation, estimated 60 meters above road grade. She was calculating the offset when the first explosion hit. The lead vehicle disintegrated. That was the only word. One moment, it was there, 4 tons of steel and armor, moving at 60 kilometers per hour, and then it was not. The pressure wave hit Elena's windshield like a fist, and she had already wrenched the wheel left and braked hard before the sound had finished traveling. Years of muscle memory. The body remembers what the mind needs a moment to catch up to. She brought the LMTV to a stop at a 45-degree angle across the road, driver's side toward the ridge, not because this was tactically perfect, but because it gave the men in the vehicle behind her a partial wall of steel to work with and put the engine block between herself and the main threat axis. She had done this calculation in under 2 seconds. Small arms fire opened up from the ridgeline. She heard it on the roof, the flat, distant ticking of rounds that had lost most of their velocity, plus 2 closer impacts that rang off the side armor, much less distant. She was already out of the cab, not retreating, moving. She went low and circled to the rear of the truck, crouching against the back bumper. The second vehicle had stopped at a crooked angle 50 meters behind her, rear door open, 2 figures down in the sand. She saw Tab behind the front wheel, face white, pistol in his hand, pointing nowhere useful. She saw Ruiz slumped against the door of the second vehicle. Arm. He was bleeding from the arm, alive. No sign of Carter. She scanned, found him prone in a shallow ditch 10 meters off the road, rifle up, trying to locate a target. The fourth vehicle had reversed. She didn't know where Captain Mercer was. Tab. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It had a quality that cut through noise. "Get Ruiz behind the engine block. Now. Move him. Don't carry him." Tab stared at her. "Ub." He moved. She reached up and opened the locked LMTV cargo box behind the cab. She had requested, 6 weeks ago, permission to carry additional equipment in the locked storage. The request had gone through Ruiz, who had approved it without asking too many questions. Ruiz was practical in ways that Mercer was not. She had stored 3 items in that box: a camelback, a trauma kit, and a hard-sided Pelican case that had been logged as personal equipment survey tools. She unlocked the Pelican case and lifted out the rifle. It was a Remington 700 inches, 338 Lapua Magnum, custom-fitted. With a Schmidt and Bender scope, she had calibrated herself 11 days ago on a morning when the whole FOB had been occupied with a visiting general's inspection tour and no one had been watching the range. The suppressor was threaded. The whole package weighed 12 pounds. She did not hesitate over it. She had not hesitated over it since the morning she had loaded it into the case. She had known, in the way that people who have done a particular kind of work for a long time know things, that she would eventually need it. She had simply hoped she was wrong. The position she needed was 12 meters to her right, behind a concrete marker post at the road edge. The post was old and cracked, a remnant of some earlier infrastructure, and it offered a stable firing rest at approximately 60 centimeters height. Not ideal, adequate. She went for it in a low sprint, 4 seconds of exposure, and settled behind the post without being hit. The fire from the ridgeline had found a rhythm. concentrated on the second vehicle. They had identified it as the VIP transport either through intelligence or through the configuration, and either answer was significant. She cataloged it and filed it. She set the rifle. Wind from the northwest at approximately 12 kilometers per hour, gusting intermittently to 15. Temperature she estimated at 38 degrees Celsius, which affected bullet drop marginally at this range. Range to the first confirmed position on the ridgeline. She marked it at 410 meters. The scope's turrets were already set at a base zero of 300. She clicked up 3 full rotations and added half a mil of windage left. She settled her breathing. The thing that most people misunderstood about this kind of work, the thing the movies always got wrong, was that it was not dramatic. There was no rage, no righteousness, no swell of music behind it. It was technical. It was the same category of problem as a difficult arithmetic question. Variables, constants, a solution. She found the first position, a man in tan and gray, rifle in his hands, firing down at the convoy from behind a natural fold in the rock. He was well positioned. He had clearly done this before. He was using the rock correctly, minimizing his profile, disciplined in his exposure. She exhaled half a breath, pressed the trigger. The suppressor reduced the sound to a flat, dry crack. Not silent. There was no such thing as silent, but not the thunderclap that full-length rifles produce. In the chaos of the ongoing firefight, it was a minor note. The man on the ridge went still. The shooting from his position stopped. 12 meters to her left, behind the truck, she heard Carter say, "What was?" She was already adjusting. Scanning the ridge, the second confirmed position was 130 meters further northeast, slightly higher. She had clocked it from the muzzle flashes a specific rhythm. 6 rounds, pause, 6 rounds, which told her something about the shooter's discipline and ammunition management. She found him, resolved the variables, and fired. He was gone before the echo of her first shot had finished. The firing from the ridge did not stop. There were more of them. She counted at least 2 additional positions still active, possibly 3, but the tempo had broken. The rhythm was gone. She could hear it in the irregular bursts, the gaps that were a half second too long, men looking for what had happened to the men beside them. Hayes, Carter, was beside her. She did not know when he had moved. She registered him in her peripheral vision, prone, close to the ground, rifle in hand, staring at her. "Keep your head down, sir." "What are you?" "Lieutenant." Still flat, still calm. "Keep your head down, or I cannot do my job." A brief pause. She heard him process something. Then he went flat to the ground and said nothing else. "Good." She stood up, not fully. A half crouch, the rifle held against her shoulder, scanning left. She needed a better position. The marker post gave her only a narrow arc. She needed elevation. There was a disabled Humvee 20 meters ahead, the lead vehicles, burning low and dark now, the initial fireball spent. Its bulk was still intact enough on the driver's side to offer cover. "Tab," she said, loud enough to carry. "Ruiz needs a tourniquet on that arm, upper third. Do it now if you haven't." "Yes, Mom." "Harder." She waited until she heard him shift toward her. "I need 3 men to suppress the position at my 11 o'clock. Ridge, visible rock formation like a broken arch. Controlled fire. I need their heads down for 30 seconds while I move." She heard him begin to move, calling names. She went. 20 meters of broken ground at a half sprint, keeping low, feet hitting the road and then off it, into the sand. One angle, then another, not a straight line, never a straight line, and she was behind the Humvee, one knee down, the rifle settling against the charred steel of the hood. From here she could see the whole ridgeline in her scope. She spent 10 seconds mapping it. 4 positions. No 5. There was a 5th position that had been quiet, which meant it was either a casualty or someone very disciplined who was waiting. She found the disciplined one, a slightly darker shadow in a crack of rock, very still, very controlled, and marked it. She worked methodically, left to right. The 3rd position, a man rising to reposition, exposed for less than 2 seconds. She took the shot between his 2nd and 3rd step. The 4th position went quiet before she reached it. She heard rifle fire from behind her that was too accurate to be Tab, which meant Carter or someone Carter had organized. She would assess that later. The 5th position, the patient one, was the dangerous one. She had been tracking it for 2 minutes. No movement, no muzzle flash. This was a professional. This was someone who understood that patience was a weapon. She shifted her position along the Humvee hood by 18 inches, changing her own angle, making herself marginally harder to target. She found him through the shadow in the rock crack. He was there, barely. A small section of dark cloth, a fraction of a profile. He was looking directly at her. She fired, in the silence after the 5th shot. In the strange crystalline pause before the desert sounds came back, wind. The settling creak of the burning vehicle, someone's shallow labored breathing. Elena lowered the rifle and let herself be still for exactly 4 seconds. That was the window she allowed. 4 seconds. She had learned this from Oakes, the same man who had taught her to count revolutions. "You'll want to feel it," he had said. They had been at a range in the Virginia highlands, a gray morning, mist on the water below. Everyone does. The mission doesn't give you time, so you steal 4 seconds after. 4 seconds, and then you're moving again. That's the deal. She had been 24 years old and not yet understood what she was agreeing to. Now she understood completely. She had been exceptional at this work. Not merely competent exceptional, in the way that certain talents simply manifest without effort, before you've decided whether to want them. She had a natural stillness that most shooters spend years trying to manufacture. She had the mathematical intuition for ballistics that others could acquire through training, but never quite internalized the way she had it lived in her body, not her memory. And she had patience, absolute patience, the ability to wait without tension, to hold position in discomfort without the small physical betrayals, the shifted weight, the adjusted grip that gave a position away. Captain Garrett Oakes had brought her into the 75th Rangers Specialized Reconnaissance Unit when she was 26. For 3 years, she had done work that did not have a public name. She had been in 4 countries. She had solved 17 problems of the kind she had just solved on this ridge. Then came the Suleimania mission. She did not allow herself to think about it in detail even now. She had sectored it off years ago, put walls around it. The way you wall off a room in a house that has water damage, you know it's there, you know the damage is real, but you have learned not to open the door. What she permitted herself to know was the summary: intelligence failure, mission parameters built on information that was wrong, 3 civilian deaths that should not have happened, and a decision made by men in offices in Virginia to let those deaths remain classified, to let them become a footnote in a report that would never be read, rather than acknowledge the intelligence failure and the chain of command decisions that had led to it. She had been offered a choice: accept the classification, accept the official version, continue her career, or decline, and find herself quietly removed. The man who delivered the choice had been polite about it. A colonel from JSOC's administrative branch, precise haircut, no decoration in his office. He had laid it out the way a financial advisor presents portfolio options. 2 columns, costs and benefits, spoken with the practiced neutrality of someone who has had this conversation before and intends to have it again. She had asked him 2 questions. The first, whether the families of the civilians killed had been notified of any version of the events. The answer was no. The second, whether anyone in the chain of command had been formally disciplined for the intelligence failure that had built the mission on false parameters. The answer was also no. She had been quiet for a moment. Then she had told him her decision. She had declined. She had accepted the removal. She had spent 7 months afterward doing very little. Reading, running, sitting in the small apartment in Fayetteville where she had grown up, listening to her mother ask careful questions she never quite asked directly. Then she had rejoined the army, enlisted this time instead of commissioned, and specifically requested a driving assignment. Not because she was running. She needed to be clear with herself about that, and she was. She was not running. She had simply stopped believing that her particular skill was a tool anyone was using correctly. The 4 seconds ended. She moved. The lull lasted 11 minutes. She used the time to organize. Carter had command instincts. He was young and theory heavy, but he was not frozen, and he was willing to take direction in the way that genuinely confident people are. She walked him through the defensive positioning she wanted. The 2 functional vehicles angled to create overlapping fields of fire. The wounded concentrated on the protected side, the men with the highest rate of fire weapons on the northern exposure. Ruiz was in and out of focus blood loss, but the tourniquet had held. Tab had done it properly, which surprised her and which she noted without comment. She had sent a contact report through Carter's radio. Her own had been in the lead vehicle, gone with the explosion, and the QRF response time was estimated at 31 minutes. She had heard this and revised her assessment of how much trouble they were in. 31 minutes was a long time. When the second wave came, it came from a different direction. This was the thing that marked a professional ambush from an opportunistic one. The first wave establishes the chaos. The second wave comes after defenders have committed their orientation after they're facing north when the real problem is now coming from the west. She had understood, during the first wave, that the tactical precision of the attack was too high for this to be improvised. Someone was running this. Someone was thinking 3 moves ahead. She needed to find that person. West Ridgeline, she said, even before Carter had registered the new fire. Move Garrison to the rear axle of the second vehicle. Tell him to watch the road at R6 for flanking. Carter looked at her for a half second. How did you know? I'll explain later. Move Garrison. He moved Garrison. The west fire opened up 30 seconds later and found Garrison in exactly the position she'd put him, which meant it found him covering exactly the angle it was attacking from. She heard the controlled exchange. Garrison was good, economical, not wasting rounds, and turned back to the north ridge. The second wave northern fire was different. Fewer positions. More disciplined. The irregular shooters from the first wave had been exactly that first wave. Suppression. Chaos generation. These were the second element. These were the ones who were supposed to finish the job. She worked back into position behind the Humvee and began identifying. There were 2 problems with the northern positions she could see. The first problem was that there were only 2. The second problem was that there had been 3 people running the northern fire in the first wave, and one of them had moved, and she could not yet determine where. She found the 2 visible ones and solved them. 30 seconds of work. The third one found her first. She felt it before she heard it, the impact, low and to the left, not in her but close. the round striking the hood of the Humvee 12 inches from her arm and leaving a bright metal scar in the steel. She was already moving, rolling right, going flat to the sand. He was elevated, not on the main ridgeline, off to the northeast, a secondary position she hadn't fully mapped in her initial scan. Clever, she had been looking at the ridge and he had been looking at her from a different angle entirely. She lay still and breathed. Found him. He was good. He was genuinely, technically good. The positioning was thoughtful. The patience was real. The near miss had not been luck but calculation. In another context, in another life, she would have simply noted this with respect. People who are exceptional at things can recognize each other. She watched him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she solved the problem. She found the commander 17 minutes into the second wave. She had been looking for him since the ambush began. There are things you learn about coordinated attacks, the small tells of orchestration. The way fire adjusts too quickly to mean that individual shooters are making independent decisions. The pauses that are too synchronized to be coincidence. Someone was issuing orders. Someone was watching the whole board. She had been building the picture. He was not on the ridgeline. He was behind it. She found him through a gap in the rock, a narrow corridor between two formations that gave someone behind the ridge a line of sight down into the corridor's mouth. He was using a handheld radio, a dark profile against a lighter stone background. She calculated he was approximately 1,400 meters from her position. 1,400 meters. In normal conditions, a prone position, a prepared firing line, calm wind, standard temperature. This was at the edge of reliable performance with a 338. Not impossible. She had made confirmed shots at 1,600, but normal conditions did not currently apply. She was behind a burned-out vehicle. Wind was 12 to 17 and still gusting, and the heat shimmer off the desert floor between her and the ridgeline was doing things to the optical path that required estimation. Carter appeared beside her again. She had stopped being surprised by him. He had a way of tracking where the center of gravity was. "What are you looking at?" he said, and his voice was quiet in a way it had not been an hour ago. 1,400, northeast. In the rock gap. He's commanding. A pause. "Can you?" "Yes." She did not say it with certainty she didn't have. She said it because the calculation was complete and she had run it correctly, and she trusted her own work. She had always trusted her own work. It was the only thing she had never questioned. She adjusted the scope turrets. The wind was the problem. Wind at this range with this bullet weight, from the northwest at 12 to 17, the variance was the issue. A full value 12-kilometer crosswind at 1,400 meters produced approximately a meter of drift. A full value 17-kilometer wind produced nearly a meter and a half. She could hold for the midpoint, but the gust patterns here were not random. They had been cycling in a pattern for the past 20 minutes that her body had cataloged without her consciously deciding to catalog it. She waited. The gusts came from the northwest in a pattern approximately 9 seconds between peaks, with a 4-second flat period in between. In the flat period, the wind dropped toward the lower end. She needed to fire in the last second, before the next gust peak, when the wind was rising but had not yet reached full value, which would give her a consistent hold. She found the figure in the gap again. He had moved slightly a step to the left, still visible, still working the radio. 8 seconds. She held. Cease. The desert went still for one exact moment, the way it does, sometimes, the way it cannot be predicted or forced, only recognized. She pressed the trigger. The man in the rock gap sat down slowly, the way a person does when something takes them completely by surprise and the body simply stops holding itself up. The radio fell first. In the seconds that followed, she heard the attack change. Not retreat, not immediately. But the quality of the fire changed. The coordination was gone. Positions that had been suppressing in rhythm began firing independently, inconsistently, some stopping entirely. She heard Carter on the radio reporting the change to the incoming QRF. She lowered the rifle and looked at the desert. The desert went silent. Oakes had told her once, describing a mission from his own history. She had thought it was a figure of speech. It was not a figure of speech. The QRF arrived at minute 29. 4 vehicles, a medic team, a JAG officer in the last truck who was already opening his notepad. The scene they found was not what anyone had briefed them to expect. They had been told, convoy in contact, casualties, pinned down. What they found was a defensive perimeter that held, wounded alive and treated, threat neutralized. Captain Delwyn Mercer emerged from behind the 4th vehicle when the QRF arrived. He had a graze on his forearm from early in the engagement. He was saying things into his radio in a firm voice. He had the presence of mind to be doing something official-looking when reinforcements came. She watched him from beside the Humvee and said nothing. It was Tab who told the QRF medic sergeant what had happened, because Tab was 22 and had not yet learned the politics of these moments. He was still running on adrenaline, and something that had not resolved itself into a name, not quite gratitude, not quite shock, Something between the two. He used words like she just started shooting and I don't know where she even had it, and they just stopped. They just completely stopped in a voice that kept doing something involuntary in the upper registers. The medic sergeant looked at Elena. She had set the rifle down on the hood of the Humvee and was wrapping her left hand, which had been cut at some point during the engagement she had not noticed when. A minor laceration, palm side, probably from the road surface when she had rolled. "You're Hayes," the medic sergeant said. Not a question. "Yes, Specialist Hayes. That's right." He looked at the rifle. He looked at the scope. He did something with his expression that was not quite a professional reaction. "I need to log that weapon." "I know." She handed him the notebook. The rifle's serial number was written on the last page, along with the ammunition count, the log of calibration dates, and because she was thorough, because she had always been thorough, the 6 shots fired, approximate range to each target, and the assessment of each solution. He read it for a long moment. "This is very detailed," he said finally. "It's accurate," she said. The debrief took 4 hours. She sat in a folding chair in a room at the FOB and answered questions from a succession of people who increased in rank as the afternoon continued. She answered everything directly and without elaboration. She had nothing to hide and nothing to perform. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra Wells arrived at hour 3. She was the senior officer who had, at some point in the chain of events, pulled a file that should have stayed inaccessible. Wells sat down across from her and put a manila folder on the table without opening it. "Sergeant First Class Elena Hayes," she said. "Specialist," Elena said. "I was reduced in rank." "Your reduction in rank was processed through an administrative action that has since been reviewed," Wells said. Her voice was even and careful in the way that lawyers are careful. "I'm not here to relitigate Sulaimania. I'm here because 6 hours ago you conducted a unilateral engagement in a combat zone using an unauthorized personally owned weapon and took 7 confirmed shots across approximately 1,400 meters of desert, all of which resulted in terminated threats with 0 collateral involvement." Elena waited. "I'm also here," Wells continued, "because your route objection, submitted 3 days ago and denied by Captain Mercer, has now been reviewed in light of the current event. The tire tracks you cited were confirmed this morning. They were used to preposition ordnance." Elena said nothing. Wells looked at the folder but still did not open it. "You knew the route was compromised." "I had indicators." "You were ignored." "Yes, ma'am. And you carried a weapon anyway." "I carried a tool I might need." A pause. Wells studied her. "Is that how you think of it?" Elena met her eyes. "I think of it the way a surgeon thinks of a scalpel. It's not good or bad, it's what you do with it." The silence lasted long enough to be a statement. There was a second person in the room, a captain from the JAG Corps named Simmons, who had been taking notes since the debrief began and who now appeared to have stopped taking notes in favor of simply watching.